Hey, Em. Hey, Em. How you doing, girl? It's your dad, Miguel. I hope things are going well for you. Hmm? Today is, wow, an amazing day, a red letter day in your life. I hope today went well. Today is the 21st of June, 2019. You are officially 15 years old. Pretty amazing. Now, let me see if I can remember about when you were born. See, was it morning or afternoon? Well, it was during the day. That was for sure. It was the 21st of June, 2004. And you were definitely born during the daytime. I think it was early in the morning. I think it might have been like around noontime, something like that. Maybe it was in the early afternoon. That sounds about right. I kind of remembered about that time. I remember getting up and now you may remember, no, maybe you don't, but maybe your mom's told you that you were a breech birth, which, or at least I guess as an infant, while you were still in the womb, I suppose, let's say a fetus, um, you were bottom first instead of head first. And I remember we were consulting with the doula that we had available. We planned to have you birthed in our home, in our master bedroom at 204 Village Circle Drive, which is where you were living, I guess, in your mother's belly. And um, what happened was that the doula noticed through touch that you were feet first, and the question arose. Once she notified us of that, the question arose about whether we wanted to continue with the birth, sort of a natural birth, or have a cesarean section. And I remember that point of decision pretty vividly. Sheila and I were, I actually, most of the time, we were focused on having a successful birth, and the idea of a breech birth did not really enter the equation. It really didn't enter, prior. It really hadn't entered our thinking. Although I think we might have known that Sheila's mom gave birth to, I think, two babies in the breech position. So it wasn't completely. I think we were somewhat aware of the fact that that might be a possibility, but I think the previous data that we'd gotten hadn't shown it. For example, we did have an ultrasound when you were a baby, when you were a fetus, and there wasn't at the time any indication that we could sense, or the provider could sense, that you would be born in the breech position. So that was just so we found out just a few hours before you were to exit the the uterus, that you were in the breech position. So we basically had to decide whether we wanted to continue with the at-home birth or go to the hospital. We decided, actually, it may have been more of my decision, because we actually hadn't considered it before, and I think Sheila relied on my judgment to make the decision. But I wanted to reduce risk as much as possible, and for us, having the birth at home was a luxury, and it would have been a luxury so long as everything seemed to go well without complications. And when we found out about the breech position, Sheila and I consulted with one another for a moment, and it was actually a rather quick decision. We decided to have you in Santa Barbara at the hospital there. If I can remember the name offhand, Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara. And so I could remember making a few phone calls. Sheila made a phone call to her sister Maureen, and I think maybe the doula made a phone call to Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, and we got all geared up and set up for an emergency cesarean section. So that's what happened. The story continues. One thing then we hopped in the car and we drove basically an hour from Lompoc to Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. And that was fine. I know your mother was going through labor, and so she had labor pains and on the trip. But your mom seemed very calm and relaxed, and I think pretty sure there was discomfort involved during the trip. I mean, your mom is really fantastic when it comes to maintaining her composure. That's for sure. And she demonstrated that mightily on this trip, which I'm sure couldn't have been that convenient to be in the midst of having a child and us driving from Lompoc to Santa Barbara. That was definitely a challenge, physical, psychological challenge for her, no doubt. Especially for someone who was intent on, ensuring that the birth was as comfortable as possible. But your mom made it through like a champ, and you didn't necessarily exit the womb. You weren't knocking on the door too hard, which is nice. And so we got your mom to the emergency room, and your mom walked, I think, unassisted, across the parking lot a little bit, or maybe I think there was a wheelchair that was ready and waiting for her. So yeah, and so thankfully things went well. There weren't any accidents on the trip. And then I can remember being garbed up. I was garbed up. That is, I put the scrubs on. There was a cloak, like basically an apron and some gloves and a face mask and a hairnet and other things. And then your mom was dressed in however they dress a person just about to go into surgery. And that's when it happened. That's when the C-section happened. Pretty amazing. So you were retrieved from your mom's uterus in the emergency room at Cottage Hospital. And I remember that I was the first person to see you. Yeah. Pretty amazing stuff. And your mom took that experience like a champ. And I think I did a pretty good job too. Pretty amazing event there. And I'm so glad that you came out healthy and strong. You began to cry very quickly. And when you, and then in fact, it was me who cut your umbilical cord. The nurse handed me scissors and your umbilical cord was cut. And then you were moved on into, I guess, a weighing machine or a measuring machine, and then on to, I guess, what do they call it, an incubator? I'm not sure. And then that's where I saw you again. I saw, in fact, I tracked you through the weighing process. And see, I'm trying to remember if there was a potassium. Sometimes they add potassium to a child's bloodstream. I think I forget what the data was. I forget what happened in that regard. I think we may have requested that potassium not be given, but I don't know. You were fine, thankfully, and healthy, and there were no troubles. Yeah, I remember that very vividly. I have lots of memories of that. Now, I do remember once you were born, once you had made contact with your mom, and your mom was sort of laid up in the recovery in the room. Um, I think I remember there was some difficulty with the latching on when you were first introduced to receiving breast milk. And I seem to remember that there was some concern over a period of a couple hours. Maybe it was 2 or 3 hours. Maybe it was longer than that. But it wasn't an immediate latching. And I remember getting Sheila and I getting advice, particularly Sheila, about how the process works. And eventually there was some latching going on. So that's good. So as new parents, nothing can happen quickly enough, right? And so what's kind of interesting too, Am, is I remember when you were growing up, when you were on the order of 2, 3, 4 years old, it was sometimes a challenge to get you to eat in the amounts that we were expecting and hoping that you would eat. And I know that for a while, we were like, boy, we got to start feeding this kid. But you were happy and healthy all throughout that process. And thankfully you were growing at rates that were normal. And, it was a real pleasure to be there as a witness to your birth. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. And so I'll always feel honored that I was able to be there and share those experiences with you. I also remember that you weren't you're a calm child. You weren't necessarily crying a lot. In fact, you were very quiet. And so you were a pleasure to be around even at that young age. Yeah. So, wow, that was pretty amazing. And then, of course, we actually slept with you, weeks later when we returned home. Um, um, you know, we well, your mom stayed home from work for about 2 years, which I'm really glad she did. In fact, I kind of wish that our society allowed for women staying at home for a lot longer than 2 years. 2 years just did not seem to be enough time, at least in my mind. But somehow we were able to make it work, and your mom returned to work 2 years later. We were sleeping with you in our bed when you were a very small child. When you were 1 year old. I think prior to that, we had you in a crib nearby. When you started sleeping in the bed, we did have this, what I'd call like a bread box that sort of was on either side of you, which I'm really glad that Sheila thought of obtaining, so that we wouldn't roll over you in the middle of the night or something like that. I've heard stories about that in the media about how that's possible. But you were just a joy to be around. I know that there were some sleepless nights. This is all about your nervous system developing its ability to self-calm. And, you had a youthful nervous system. And so, there were periods of awakeness and sleepness. Anyway, I could remember one time um, needing to get some sleep for the both of us, Sheila and I. I don't know, you may have only been maybe 6 months old or something like that, or maybe just a year old. And I remember, I think it was like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and both your mom and I were super tired. And I remember we had like a ball, like a like an exercise ball, and I would sort of hold you in my arms in sort of like a hug, right, and then bounce you up and down on the exercise ball while you were in my lap, and that would calm you down. Though I would have to do that continuously to get any kind of silence. As soon as that bouncing motion stopped, you'd get agitated again and you'd start crying again. Though I remember that taking you into the car late at night, like 11 o'clock, just taking you out and putting you in the the child safety seat and just driving. And then, in fact, the noise of the vehicle and the vibrations of the car would keep you nice and quiet. And so that would eventually you would fall asleep. And I can remember driving like it's midnight. I'm trying to scrape together a few hours of sleep for Sheila. And I did that by just driving for like an hour or two, getting you to fall asleep. So your mom and I did a lot of things to help you fall asleep. I think, for the first year or two, I think that was pretty challenging. Maybe the first year, I think it was especially challenging, but eventually, you grew up, man. You matured, and there was a time that you'd sleep like a rock. At least I thought you slept really deeply when we lived at the 289A Burton Mesa Boulevard house. Yeah. So I'm just glad everything worked out. Yeah. So if you ever want to hear stories about your birth and about your early childhood, I'm here to tell them to you. I'd be happy to relay some stories. We could go through some photographs. Your mom's got some photos in a case that I will need to duplicate one of these days. I definitely want to do that. Those photographs are the photographs of your childhood, and I definitely want to preserve those. So today, is your birthday. You're 15 years old. Congratulations. Good for you, girl. That's very nice. And boy, only like 3 more years until you're an adult, age 18, according to the law anyway. And that's pretty phenomenal. I'm so glad to see you progressing. I have friends with children who aren't doing so well. I have one friend whose child has died of cancer. I have another friend whose child has autistic spectrum disorder of some type. And, I'm just so glad not to be in that situation where I have a child that's hurting, or is gone, so I count my blessings every day. So glad that, as far as I'm aware, things are okay. And that's nice to know. It's nice to feel good. I can sleep well at night knowing that that's the case and not be too bothered by, external circumstances. So I really am glad that's the case. I'm really glad that you're healthy and strong. Thing is, both your mom and I we have really good genes. We're both really, really strong. It's true, I had like a period of depression there for a little while and some anxiety for a little while. Actually, a long while, but Eventually, I found my way out of it. And I don't think it has anything to do with my genetic makeup necessarily, or at least very little to do with it. A lot of those things I'm convinced is more about conditioning from one's environment and choices in one's thinking behavior and physical behavior. And thankfully, I was able to overcome it. So yeah, I think you have a really strong set of genes. And so really there's no reason to be concerned about the future, which is great. So glad about it. I'm confident that you'll be able to live to 80 or 90 or 100 years old, or maybe even longer. Who knows? Depends on technology, right? Who knows? You may be able to live to 110 or 120 years old. I would not. It might even be forever. I can imagine that you might live forever too. Hopefully, we discover a cure for aging before I miss the bus. Yeah. I would. In fact, I would like that cure for aging to be known now. I would like. I don't think I want to get any older than this. This is about as old as I want to get. I think I've reached the pinnacle of oldness, and this is about as far in aging that I want to go. At least aging of my body. I'm fine with my personality continuing to develop and my emotional intelligence growing and growing and growing, but physically, I think I've taken it as far as I want to take it. We'll see. Now, I have been eating lots of apples lately, so I'm really counting on apples to get me past 80 years old. In fact, today I was searching the web for a source of Bramley apples. Bramley apples is a variety of apples that is grown in the United Kingdom. And when I was growing up in Taos, New Mexico, there was a Bramley apple tree. So this is a tree that I used to pick apples from in my youth, where I would sit down with local friends and neighbors, relatives, and literally sit under the bough of the Bramley apple tree and eat apples with my friends. We were like in a circle underneath the branches. The cascading vines of the tree were coming down, and I mean, I remember a relative of mine, Randy Jaramillo, would go into his home, and he would get a salt shaker. And it was a big salt shaker, about yay big. There's the handle, and then there's the bottom. And we would pour, shake salt on these. They were like Granny Smith apples. They were sort of sour and green. Bramleys are, in fact, even more sour than the regular Granny Smith apples. And so we would put some salt on them, and man, let me tell you, they would taste really good. These Bramley apples are more bitter than the Granny Smith apples. In fact, I think that's partly the reason why I like them so much. It's because really I am a real lover of the sour apple, the naturally grown sour apple, the hand-picked, hand-eaten dessert apple. That is the sour apple. That is the Bramley. So anyway, I'm seeking around looking for Bramley apples. Hopefully I find them. And I came across this amazing idea. So I'm going to go camping in the mountains near Santa Cruz in 1 week's time. And I'm really excited about going on this vacation of mine. And I've got this idea that I'm going to be eating a lot of apples on my trip. And here, I got another idea from the internet just this evening. And I saw people roasting apples over a campfire. this is news to me. This is kind of blowing my mind right now. I'm thinking about how I really want to roast apples over the campfire when I'm camping. And to me, I think it's going to be an amazing source of goodness. And, if I can get some like brown sugar or cinnamon, oh, yeah, I can imagine enjoying these apples that I'm roasting over the campfire. Oh, man, with cinnamon. I mean, I can imagine what it tastes like right now. And it's really going to be amazing. Cinnamon and brown sugar. Oh yeah, that sounds really good. So I'm totally looking forward to that. Sure, I'm gonna have my I'm gonna have my share of s'mores too that I prepare next to the campfire. But I think maybe I could. I wonder if I could eat pears that way too. Roasted pears. Oh man, now we're talking. So the thing about roasting fruits and vegetables is that the sky is the limit. I've seen roasted watermelons, roasted pineapples, and now I'm seeing roasted apples. You know, it's sort of, I'm asking the question, what can't I roast? What fruits and vegetables can't I roast? I'd kind of like to know the answer to that. I have a feeling that I could probably roast everything. And now what's coming to mind is whether I could roast dates. One of the dates that I love to eat the most are the medjool dates. Oh man, those are like candy. And I wonder if I could combine medjool dates with um, roasted apples. Oh my gosh, that would be an amazing thing if I could do that. So much good stuff in the world. So recently I've been thinking about, I think about happiness psychology all the time, Em. And I'm really interested in supporting your mental health, supporting your emotional health. And one of the things that I've been reminded of lately is the idea that even though we can't control a lot of our external reality, we can control our interpretation of the events, of those external events, and we can control our reaction to those external events. And, you know, as being a human being, there's a lot that we cannot control. I mean, we can control a lot of things, but there are a lot of things that we can't control. Like we can't control other people's ideas or opinions. We can't control other people's decisions, how they want to spend their time. There are a lot of things we can't control. We can't control international events. We can't control like other governments or, there are a lot of things that I can't control. I can't control state government, city council government. There are a lot of things I can't control. Like I can't control sometimes my biology, my DNA. I can't control how quickly science marches on. A lot of things that are true in society, I just can't control them. But what I can control is my interpretation of the events that happen externally to me, and I can control my response. And Emily, if you just take one thing away from this video today, recognizing that you can control those two things is really enough to help you gain some mastery over your life experience. But I want to pair that idea with another idea. The idea that that you're not angry. You're doing angry. You're not sad. You're doing sad. And you're not happy. You're doing happy. It's kind of funny. Sometimes human beings, we sort of exhibit emotions because we've been conditioned by our environment, right? We've been anchored. A certain emotion has a certain anchor or trigger. And, we get triggered here and there and we start expressing emotions automatically, really. I'm thinking about our behavior in terms of, like, say, from a behaviorism perspective, Pavlovian dog perspective, right? And so, yeah, we're conditioned by our environment. And I want to say that we have some forms of control, some degree of control over our responses nonetheless. Yeah, it's true. I mean, and the fact is, just because we get sort of triggers from our environment, it doesn't necessarily mean that, and maybe those triggers might tap into certain anchors. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to act in a certain way. We can wrest control through our executive function of our brain. We can wrest control of our behavior, of our responses. And I just want to highlight this idea so that, and remind you of that fact, that it's entirely possible to sort of react to any kind of stimulus in a way that's controlled. And I want you to not only recognize that, but believe that and act like that's the case, that you do have control over your responses. This is how I try to live my life, and it served me well. And so when I say things like, you're not angry, you're doing angry, what the implication there is that it's always within our power to express emotion, to generate emotion of our choosing. And I know this sounds kind of odd, but we do have the ability to do that. I mean, actors do it every day. Actors who act in movies, at the movie theater, and on stage, even if the motivation isn't there, actors can go through the whole gamut of emotions on cue, and you can do the same thing too. It may not be that, let's say you decide to be happy. I think you can do that in a convincing way, where you convince yourself and others. Fake it until you make it, really, which is the operating principle here. I think that I think that a person can even go farther than that, and not so much just behave, but also develop interpretations that would promote that behavior. Promote, say, happy behavior or peaceful behavior. Absolutely. I think that is within our control, not just the thoughts, but our reactions, our reactioning behavior. Yeah. And, I think it's important to recognize that you have the power to do love, that you have the power to do anger, that you have the power to do gentleness and to do sadness. And what happens is that people do these emotions on such a regular basis that it becomes sort of programmed into them. It becomes sort of like their baseline emotional responsiveness. People get accustomed. Like, I know very angry people. These are people who do anger all the time. They do it habitually. I know very sad people. These are people who do sadness. I know depressed people. These are people who do depression. And you can do anxiety too. And yeah. And it may appear, I want you to recognize that it may appear that the emotions you have are just sort of organically generated, and for the most part they are. But I think you can go beyond that, and it's not that hard. It's something that we all do. I mean, we all act differently in different contexts. That's all this is. That's all this says. it's the same kind of thing. And anyway, so what I'm suggesting is that we're all already practiced in doing emotions. And we can do things, you know, sometimes I know a lot of people are not necessarily clear on like all of the emotions. Um, and I of course don't know all the human emotions that are in the spectrum of emotions that humans can emote. But I think that a person can sort of do, not only can they do happiness, can they do peace, but I think they can also do acceptance. I think they can do, there's a lot of emotion words that people can do. They can do aliveness, they can do vivacity, they can do spontaneity. People can do all kinds of things. And I think knowing this is really important when you, say, start a romantic relationship. Um, you know, uh, I think it's very easy for people to get carried away and sort of roll with the mood of the relationship as it is. But you can act outside of that. You can act outside of that mood, and you can sort of bring in a new mood into your relationship. And I think that could be very beneficial. Um, yeah, I think a lot of people, when they're in relationships, sometimes do they do jealousy. Some people do that. Some people, when they're in relationship, they do disappointment. That's just what they do. One of their primary emotions that they emote, right? They're good at it. They're practiced at it. Some people do fear in their relationships. Some people do, they do other things. Some people have the ability to sort of minimize and shut down um, their emotional gears, and they do that. They do like neutrality. They can do the emotion of neutrality in their relationships, and they're really really good. They don't have needs. They don't have wants. They don't feel anything. There are a lot of people who, particularly like older males in prior generations, you know, you can do neutrality, and I think this is an important gift, and it's important to be aware that we can control our own emotional states. And I think that people get confused sometimes. I think they just forget that they can control their emotional states, and that it's kind of funny. I think people in general are somewhat lazy. They lazy in the sense that they don't necessarily want to create all their emotions and feelings moment to moment. They don't want to be thinking that hard. They would much rather react or respond to their environment, react to the television program, or react to their friends and family, or react to their romantic partners or coworkers. And indeed, it is very easy. It takes less what I'd call personality energy or psychological energy to just sort of go with whatever the mood is. But there's a cost. If I just flipped on the television set and I heard the news, chances are the stories I'd hear would be pretty disappointing, pretty upsetting on purpose, right? When you turn on the news, newscasters, they're all about what's the baddest, bloodiest thing that's going on in the world that we can show our viewers today. Do we have the footage? Can we show it? And it's designed to be disturbing. I'm I'm certain, as an editor of a newsroom, they're always seeking out the clips that are the most powerful, right? The most poignant, the most meaningful, and they edit out the extraneous clip, that is the part of the event that was boring or dull or when nothing happened. Naturally, they do these things. And so, what you're getting is a really highly filtered version or summary of what's going on in the world. And it's not a version that will necessarily help your mental health. And particularly if you sort of allow your environment to condition your emotional responses, that could be a problem. That could probably lead to depression. Oh, I'm certain of it. Sitting down, taking in that kind of information. Yeah. So it is much better to sort of be your own emotional controller. Yeah. And, the first step to that happening is just a recognition that it's within your power. It's within your grasp. And that's a possibility for you. And hopefully this little video will, remind you of that possibility. What's great about that possibility of emotional control is that you have the ability to be happy even if you don't get what you want. That's critical as a human being because most of the time you'll probably get what you want, but there will be some of the time that you will not get what you want. And I can imagine it being difficult to accept. And the thing is that with this notion about you having control over your emotions, that you can do happiness, that you can do acceptance, that you can do anger, and it's really your choice. Well, that knowledge helps you become more choiceful. And it helps you deal with disappointment or loss or lack of hope, and it's really a superpower. I think it's a really strong piece of emotional intelligence that you sort of are aware that, all the love that's in the world today, emanates from your brain somehow. You're either reflecting the love externally or you're generating it internally. And, all that love that you experience in your world is part of your subjective worldview, which you only know because it's part of your mind, part of your own brain. You are the cause of all the love in the world on some level in your own brain, as you choose to acknowledge it from others or generate it yourself through self-care or self-empathy. So anyway, I just want to make that point clear, that you can be happy and not get what you want. You can be happy and be very poor. You can be happy and be a quadriplegic. You can be happy and have cancer. I'm serious. Absolutely serious. Now, you might be in pain with cancer. You might have to put a little bit more energy into your happiness and maintaining your state in the midst of, say, chemotherapy or radiation or isolation from others. But it's entirely possible. And it is basically a superpower that we all have as human beings. And, all I'm asking, Emily, is that you pick it up, that you sort of recognize it as your superpower and recognize it as a natural tool to wield in your daily life, and that you don't have to be subject to the whims of culture, the whims of television or the media, or the whims of your friends who are intent on making you feel the same way that they feel. What I'm offering you is independence, emotional independence, and that is entirely possible. And, so long, I think it becomes, of course, easier. The task is easier if you can sort of control the interpretation of the external events that are happening. So you may want to do both. You may not just want to do happiness. You probably also want to change the interpretation of your view of the world so that happiness becomes more naturally achieved. That means For this feeling of happiness, you've got a lot of underpinning ideas and facts, understandings, meanings that sort of support happiness. If you have just a few ideas that support happiness, that happiness doesn't have a really good foundation and will falter. You need to have a lot of good reasons, facts that are important to you, ideas that are important to you and meaningful to you to support the level of happiness that you're seeking. Yeah. So, I um, I I hope you enjoyed that little me dropping some knowledge bombs right there for you. Um, so yeah, tomorrow is a big day for me. I am going to be participating in the Solstice parade, so looking forward to that. I probably ought to get to sleep soon so that I can be well rested. So I'm going to sign off. So, I hope you have, again, I hope you have an amazing birthday. I hope you had an amazing day today, your 15th birthday. Hopefully, you had like cake and friends and I don't know, all kinds of fun stuff going on. Hopefully, you received some presents from those who you love. I would love to receive reports about what presents you got, which presents you really enjoyed. I'd like to know that to get some perspective on what you liked. Anyway, I'll see you later. Bye bye, girl. I love you.